Composers might not be known for their sense of humor, but they've been in on a morbid musical joke for centuries. One that's made its way from funeral masses to Hollywood blockbusters. Hundreds of works have quoted the same melody to represent death, including Star Wars, The Shining, Lord of the Rings, and even Frozen 2. This melody is called the Dies Irae, and it comes from a Gregorian chant based on a poem of the same name from the 13th century. The accompanying text is highly religious in nature and talks about the Last Judgment, which is the moment where everyone who ever lived is either sent to heaven or hell. As a result, it started to get used by the Catholic Church for funerals and other tributes to the dead, where the concept of heaven and hell would have been top of mind for attendees. Being such an integral part of funeral masses, also called requiems, it also featured in famous works intended to be played at these events, such as Requiem by Mozart, and unsurprisingly, Requiem by Verdi. These works, however, were more about being faithful to the sequence of sections in the Requiem, as well as to the religious texts, so the composers mostly chose to compose new melodies for the Dies Irae text, rather than quoting the original melody itself. But in 1830, French composer Hector Berlioz ripped the Dies Irae text from its sacred setting and dropped it into something far more unhinged, his Symphonie Fantastique, a secular work telling the story of an artist suffering over an unrequited love. This wasn't a funeral mass anymore, it was a fever dream, a descent into obsession, madness, and ultimately, death. This part is from the last movement of the piece, called Dream of a Night of the Sabbath, in which a collection of ghosts and monsters are gathered for the protagonist's funeral. So even though Berlioz detached the melody from its religious history, he kept its connotation with funerals and death in general. This opened the floodgates, and many famous names like Franz Liszt, Sergei Rachmaninoff, and Pyotr Tchaikovsky quoted the melody in death-related contexts. Program music, in which the music is supporting and representing an actual story or concept, started to become more and more popular towards the end of the 1800s. And with the advent of film in the 1900s, the Dies Irae made the jump to the silver screen, first being used in the silent sci-fi film Metropolis. And after a few decades of relatively humble usage, it really started to spread like wildfire since the 70s, after its use in A Clockwork Orange, Star Wars, and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And there have been almost 50 scores this decade already that have quoted the melody in some shape or form. But what exactly is it about this melody that makes it so suitable to invoke death? The first thing is its meme-like propagation through the centuries. When Berlioz used it in Symphonie Fantastique, the Dies Irae was still a prominent part of the Requiem Mass, and church attendance was still very high, so many people would have still been aware of it and its association with death. So it made a lot of sense for him to use that melody, even though it was in a slightly different context. And when films became a thing, the composers now had both the original context and the popular Symphonie Fantastique to draw inspiration from when they were trying to write music to accompany visuals around death. And today, after hundreds of uses of the Dies Irae in films, it's basically like a shared musical language that's carried its original association with death through the centuries, propagating and evolving just like a meme. So now it's even easier for composers to reach for the melody, as they know that audiences will understand the underlying context, whether consciously or subconsciously. There are also some characteristics about the melody itself that help enhance this association with something menacing. The original poem is in what's called trochaic meter, which basically means that it alternates between a strong emphasis and a weak emphasis. This gives it a sort of marching or clock-ticking feel, and composers can leverage this to give the sense that something bad is coming your way, like in Squid Game. This also helps composers lyrically, as they can easily place syllables on top and keep the driving feel of the music. demonstrated perfectly by Danny Elfman in Making Christmas from The Nightmare Before Christmas.
Making Christmas. Snakes and mice get wrapped up so nice.
It's also commonly used at a slower tempo and in a low register, where the emphasis of the hits are slightly more even, but here, it's the downwards trajectory of the melody that gives it a sense of impending doom, mirroring the descent into the grave. We generally associate downwards movement in a melody with more negative emotions, and upwards movement with more positive ones. The melody is also in what's called Dorian mode, which is basically like a major scale that starts on the second note of the scale instead. This gives Dorian a unique flavor, and it's generally known as a minor mode, which tends to give the music using it a more solemn feel. There are plenty of musical tropes out there. Dramatic violin screeches in horror films, the heroic trumpet fanfare in action movies, or even the classic sad violin for emotional moments. But none have a history as long, deep, and eerily consistent as the Dies Irae. Whether it's used as a direct quote or in a more subtle, creative way, the association with death is always there, lurking in the background and reminding us of our own mortality. So next time you're watching a movie and hear those unmistakable notes, take a moment, because in that instant, you're connected to hundreds of years of history, to countless composers and filmmakers, and to a melody that fittingly has never truly been laid to rest. If you enjoyed this, you might enjoy some of our other video essays in the playlist over here, and you can also join our Discord community using the link in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time on Mixed Signals. Bye bye.